Alright, so I know everyone's very excited and ready to go and prepared for our Unit 1 test. So I got our little turtle friend up here to make you laugh a little bit and say, yay, first test, let's get it started and let's do a good job on this test. So there are several test objectives that will be on the test, and there'll be 3 questions for each objective we talk about on this video. So let's get started right away. Equivalent fractions is the first one. 3 questions will be on the test about it. So for example, let's say we have 3/4. The directions will say write an equivalent fraction for 3/4. The students should know that whenever you are changing a fraction and you want to stay equivalent, you have to multiply the top number, which we call the numerator, and the denominator by the same multiple. In this case, I'm multiplying it by 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8. So there's your answer. There's going to be 3 questions just like that. You can pick any number to multiply the fraction by, and as long as it's not 0 or 1, you'll get a new equivalent fraction. That would be a great answer, and there's 3 of them like that. So go ahead and study equivalent fractions, maybe do 3 on your own, have a parent check it, and see if you can get them correct. Now, our next one is comparing fractions, and there will also be 3 questions on comparing. So let's say we had 2/3, and you are going to compare it to 3/5. Students should notice that the denominators and the numerators are different in both fractions. So that requires us to use a strategy. One strategy would be to multiply the denominators by the opposite denominator and also multiply the numerators by the opposite denominator. For example, I would multiply 3 by 5. And if I multiply it by 5 on the bottom, I must do it to the top. That's our skill of doing equivalent fractions. Same on bottom, same on top. 2 times 5 is 10. And 3 times 5, of course, 15. I'm running out of space down there. And then we would take 3/5 and multiply it by the opposite denominator of 3. And you'll notice our new denominator, once we rename this fraction, is 5 times 3, so 15. We now have common denominators, or the same size pieces, and then 3 times 3 is 9. Now we have 15ths and 15ths. Much easier to compare because we just had to compare the 10 and the 9. Which one's larger? Well, 10/15. Therefore, 2/3 is larger. I always tell the students, if you imagine this has got teeth like an alligator, that side is eating up the larger number. It points to the lesser of the 2 fractions. I know those teeth are tough to see, but students are familiar with it. So this is the correct symbol for that one. Try a couple of those, also 3 on the test. Let's move on. Add or subtract fractions with mixed numbers. Let's get started right away. You should notice we have 4ths and 1/3. You cannot add or subtract because you do not have the same size pieces or common denominator. So a good strategy for this, since 3 can't go into the larger denominator, it goes multiples of 3 are 3 and 6. It skips 4. So we'll use the multiply by the opposite denominator for this. Now multiply this by the opposite denominator, which is 3. And this skill here, students are familiar with it, is called renaming. And we're going to rename 4 1/3 to 4 4/12, and 2 3/4 to 2 9/12. And I'm going to take my adding symbol and write it again so it reminds me I'm adding. Now that we have equal pieces, 12 and 12, we can just add the top numbers. So 4 plus 9 is 13/12, and 4 plus 2 is 6. Now this is a new skill some of us didn't learn in grade school, some of us parents. This is going to be called simplifying. We're going to have to simplify. This is a skill students are aware of, but we still struggle with it. We can't leave the answer with a improper fraction. We can't leave 13/12. This mixed number is a correct answer, but we want to write it properly. So you look at the 12, you know you have 13, so you have more than one whole in the fraction. So you know the 6 is going to turn to 7. The way we show our work here is that we rewrite our whole number, then we ask ourselves, looking at our denominator, how many 12ths make one whole? And it's 12/12. So if I put 12/12 over here, well, I have one more 12 because I had 13 that still need to be added. So this equals 6 plus 1, because 12 over 12 is 1 plus 1/12. And then our answer would be 7 and 1/12. And I know the strategy here is a lot of work and numbers here. Could be a little bit challenging to get that arithmetic written out. Another strategy coming from this point here, changing my color of my pen, this point here, is you could subtract 13 minus 12, which gives you the numerator of 1. You keep your denominator. And then since 13 was larger than 12, you knew you had added 1 to your whole number to make that 7. So you can also do it that way, a little bit more mental math. Let's move on. Make sure you try some of these adding problems. Same learning target. This one's just subtraction. Once again, we notice we have thirds and fifths. And 3 cannot go into the larger number. It skips 5 and goes to 6, so we're going to multiply. I'm going to change my color back to black. We're going to multiply by the opposite denominators, so we'll multiply this by the denominator above of 5. Multiply this by 3. This is our renaming skill. So 3 1/5 is equal to 3 3/15. And 1 2/3 is equal to 1 10/15. And this is subtraction. Now, you have to look here in subtraction. Can you take 10/15 from 3/15? Well, you don't even have 10/15. So you can't take 10/15 away from 3/15. So this is the skill called ungrouping. So we have to ungroup 3 3/15 so that the numerator is larger than 10. So we can actually take 10/15 away. So to ungroup it, you cross out and borrow the whole, and you make this 2. But I tell the students you can't make that whole disappear, so look at the denominator and how can we show a whole as a fraction in 15ths? Well, it would be 15/15, because that's one whole, plus what we have over here already, 3/15. So this equals 2, and add our numerators, 15 and 3, 18/15. That skill we just did here is called ungrouping. It's going to be on the test, and it's a skill everyone's still struggling with. Now we subtract 1 10/15. 18 minus 10 is 8. And then 2 minus 1, of course, is 1. So there's our answer. Please practice some of those. Make sure you understand how to do ungrouping. Let's move on to our last learning target. I want to get this video a little bit shorter if I can, so let's move along quickly. Last learning target for the test, besides word problems, which are the word problems on the test are going to involve the questions that they're going to make the students add and subtract fractions and mix numbers as well. So long as they have that skill and they can identify the operation to use in a word problem, they'll be okay. But the last skill I wanted to show on the video tonight is estimating fractions and mixed numbers. So if we have 3/4 plus 1/5, we know how to solve that to find the actual sum, but we want to estimate first. We estimate to make sure our answer is reasonable. So let's look at our number line. When you are adding fractions or asked to estimate fractions, you estimate them to 0, a half, or a whole, because they're fractions and they're less than one whole. So 3/4, would that be closer to 0, a half, or a whole? Well, if we look at this number line and we cut it into fourths, 3/4 is there. It's in between a half and a whole. So, looking at our other fraction, 1/5, I'm going to actually take this down to a half, because 1/5 we know is closer to 0. So a good estimate for this problem is a half, because 1/5 would be right into here, and of course that's closer to the 0. If we actually did the math on this one and found out the actual sum, we would multiply opposite denominators, and we'd be able to figure out if our estimate was reasonable. So I'm doing the work actually on a post-it note now to see if it's sort of reasonable, and we have an answer of 19/20 if I did that really quickly, accurately. To make that a better estimate, I probably used not the best strategy here. I should have estimated that to 1, and our estimate would have been 1. Therefore, the answer here of actually 19/20, which is the actual sum, would say, okay, if I estimate it to 1, it is actually a reasonable answer based on my estimation. And I'm sorry about all this. Trying to fit a lot in a small area, and it kind of gets jumbled. Thinking about this same strategy with mixed numbers, you're going to round it to or estimate it to the nearest whole number. So looking at 4 and 7/8, well, we have 7/8, which is 1 unit fraction away from 5, or the whole, so we're going to round that up to 5. And 2 and 1/8 is 1/8 away from 2, so that'd be estimated to 7. So when you're estimating with mixed numbers, you want to make sure you're estimating to the nearest whole number. Our test is coming up very soon. Please watch this video, practice these type of problems, and you will be guaranteed to do very well as long as you spend some time with this type of stuff. Okay? Have a good night.